Hey guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about a rather expansive subject, the legality of copyrights and trademarks, the differences thereof. Uh, can you copy certain superheroes? Lawsuits in regards to comic books, and what is exactly taking it too far. All right, now we're going to kind of bring this roundabout. I think we know that for the most part, Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster, these are the two guys who created Superman. Okay, I'm pointing to the actual symbol, not the whole costume. This is actually the Superboy, or more specifically, the clone of Superman costume. Um, Superman is obviously a lot more expansive. We know that those two guys were the creators of Superman in and of himself, and he is the most expansive, most inspirational, the most recognizable superhero. Honestly, guys, they said about Hulk Hogan before that. And got his figure right up there. Hulk Hogan is the most recognizable sports figure ever. And I really want you to think about that, all right? Guys in my generation, all right? Like, oh, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan. I can't even look at, some of the people today like LeBron and things like that and think, oh yeah, he's more popular than Michael Jordan. Nah, I literally look at it as there couldn't have been a Michael Jordan, or there couldn't have been a LeBron without a Michael Jordan. Well, at the same time, people older than me will say, well, there couldn't have been a Michael Jordan without a Dr. J. So it depends on how you're going to look at it, But when push comes to shove, people say, oh, Superman's the first superhero. Was he? That's the thing. A lot of these things are up to interpretation. A lot of these things are up to perception. A lot of these things are up to the perception of a judge. And that's come into play an awful lot. Guys, if you look in comic books, specifically in Action Comics and the new Superman, and you look in, Superman itself, okay, any of the Superman-related comics, any comic that has Superman in it, I believe that includes Trinity also, which can't wait for that to come out next week. But when you look at these comics, you'll see on the inside that it says Superman appears with permission and arrangements with the Siegel family. Jerry Siegel, his family and whatnot. Now, he was only one of the creators. He's only partial creator, co-creator. How does all that work exactly? Let's clear up some issues right there, right now. Jerry Siegel, okay, and Joe Shuster. These two guys created Superman. The way that it went back, way back in the day, it came from a short story, and then pictures, and then revisions. Took about a decade. It literally took about 10 years to get it. I mean, the name Superman, all right, can be used by anybody technically, because it's just two words put together. Can you use them, both of the words together, with no hyphen in between, with no space in between? No, that you can't. And we'll get into that. But the idea of using the word Superman, super hyphen man, super space man, yeah, why not? Absolutely, why not? There's no reason why you can't. These two guys finally got their work after many revisions. They finally got their work, Superman, their character, their hero, started off as a villain, their hero made in Action Comics, issue number 1. Now, they were not employed by DC Comics. Actually, they were National Comics way back then, after they were already Detective Comics and whatever. By the way, DC Comics actually stands for Detective Comics. DC is Detective Comics. So DC Comics, Detective Comics, Comics. That's actually what it means. I know it's weird, right? But they got their character. So, mind you, I'm just going to call them DC. All the different names that they were during different times, same thing I do with Marvel. They were Timely, they were Atlas, and now they're Marvel. And all of it is just Marvel, because for the sake of brevity, it's just easier that way. So DC Comics, all right, they hired these two guys to write stories for Action Comics number 1, the Superman stories. And that's what they did. But as of issue number 2 of Action Comics, they realized this was a huge, big seller. So they said, okay, we want you guys to come and work for us. So then they hired them. They didn't just hire their work. They didn't just buy their work. They weren't just contract workers or work for hire. Now, it wasn't the idea of them selling their work to these guys. Now, with issue 2 of Action Comics and onward, now they were actually employees. So everything that they did from issue 2 and onwards, that copyright is owned by DC Comics. But the first issue, everything that's in that first issue, no matter how long that's continued, is owned by Jerry Siegel, but not Joe Shuster. We're going to get into all of that. Why? Now, without delaying this or anything to that effect, please don't mind the mic wire. I'm trying to figure things out. I'm trying to figure out a better microphone system. Anyway, without going into too much detail, or without delaying too much time, right into it, guys. The idea here is that copyright laws have been extended throughout time. Like, technically, it should have been public domain for these things back in the day, but copyright laws have been changed, and 1976, I believe, is the last time that something like this has been finally situated to the point where this is a definitive time. There hasn't been a re-update to the law since, I believe, 1976. So once the copyright was actually finished, DC Comics can no longer say, well, we bought the copyright of these. So yes, they bought the copyright, but now that copyright immediately goes back to the original owners. Now, if they'd hired Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster from day one, then all that stuff would just belong to the company, and forget it. That's it. We're done. We're done. They own everything at this point on, except that it would have probably gone into public domain. But since they were work for hire, now it goes from DC back to them. Once that full, 75 years, all right, is over, it goes back to them. And I'm not going to get too much into. I know a degree of this because of my business degree, because of what I had to study there. Specialization in marketing, though. My specialization was not in business law. I took business law. I did not specialize in business law, so understand that. And I think his name is Joe. I can't remember his name, but the NerdSync channel. NerdSync? I think it's NerdSync, yes. He actually has 2 videos up there. And though he's not himself an expert, he actually went into more research, more detail with all this stuff. So he has 2 videos up about the patent or the copyright license for Superman and the lawsuit between Superman and Captain Marvel, which is Shazam, which I am absolutely getting into in this. Plus, I'm making a Shazam 1-minute video soon, probably tonight after I'm finished with this podcast. I just need to make sure I get my podcast out. So the idea here is that you can go into more detail there, or go to the Wikipedia page that he looked up and just read the stuff there. If you're comfortable with just reading and you can figure all the stuff out there, by all means, boom, just do that. Comicbookresources.com also has a very good article up very specifically about Superman. Not really about anything else for the most part, but bang, you can do that. So, sorry, with all of that to the side now, Superman is now back into the property of Jerry Siegel, not Joe Shuster. Why? Because, well, those 2 are dead. Rest in peace. May they rest in peace. Seriously. But Jerry Siegel had family. He had offspring, immediate, also he had children, right? But Joe Shuster, not so much. So the rights could go back to, I think that the rights actually went back to the nephew in 1993 or 98. I forget which one it is. Maybe it was 2003. Either way, once 2013, actually, I think it was. But once I was done, I do believe that and they're never going to fully release what happened. That's going to be, you're going to have to find that on your own. You probably find out about the Kennedy assassination before you find out about this stuff, because why would DC ever release this stuff? They want the stuff to be ambiguous, because if you don't know exactly what's going on, you're less likely to try and copy Superman. And yeah, you can copy Superman. So, in fact, it's already being done. Come and see. You'll see a little bit more. So, what happened here is the copyright that belonged, because it was 2 parts. It was completely owned by DC. Once the copyright law that was purchased was finished, it reverted back to the owners, the creators. Went to Jerry Siegel, but he was already dead, so it went to his immediate family. It went to go back to Joe Shuster, bounced right back to DC because nobody really owns it. So DC fully owns half of the copyright to Superman. The other half is owned by the Schuster family, and they can maintain that for pretty much as long as they want. Not a big deal. They can own it for a lot longer than DC was able to. So they own it. That's it. It's done. DC has to pay a stipend to the Joe Siegel family. The Jerry Siegel family. So they're going to get, and I don't know what the exact amount is. Some people speculate half. I sincerely doubt it's half. It's an arrangement. All right, it's an arrangement. So can they sell those copyrights to someone else? The Siegel family? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They could sell it to Marvel. They could sell it to Image. They could sell it to Valiant. They could sell it to whomever they want to. Could you imagine Superman in the hands of Dark Horse Comics? Imagine that, or IDW. Geez, Superman versus the Transformers. That would be great. In the meantime, what we have here is a case of they only own half of the copyright. So they could license it out, and then there would have to be arrangements in that regards. Half is owned by DC, half is owned by the Siegel family. But that doesn't involve the trademark. The trademark is fully owned by DC, and that will never change. They will continue to re-up it. I think it's every 20 years, I think. So they will continue to re-up it. They're not going to slip on that. And a slip on that would just be disastrously stupid. So I don't see that happening. I can see it happening on Green Arrow long before I see it happening to Superman. So either way, bang, that's the case. And movie rights and things like that is a somewhat different story, but they're all owned by WB at this point now. So we're good. Anyway, the idea here is that the trademark is different from the copyright. The copyright is going to be all the things that were initially done. So what does Jerry Siegel own? Jerry Siegel family, his estate, own? They own Superman. This Superman. Okay, so if we look at this particular S symbol is very different for the most part than this S symbol. And this is the exact same S symbol, it's just there's yellow inside instead of black, right? But same thing. So this copyright is owned by DC. This one is owned half by DC, half by the Siegel family. Why? Because this is the one that debuted in Action Comics issue #1. The ability, the name Superman, for the most part, yes. But what else is owned? The general idea of the costume there is owned. The blue costume with the red cape and the red underwear, all that stuff, that's out there. That specific S symbol, absolutely. That right there. That someone can, with permission, with permission from just the one, they can remake that. So the Siegel family could absolutely license that out and say, sure, anybody who wants to do this, by all means, you pay me a stipend, and then boom, this is mine. So by all means. What else? Well, his origin can actually be handed out because that was in issue #1 of Action Comics. More than that, his super speed, basically, he was faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. All of those things. His flight happened, I've said this before in other, not in other podcasts, but in other times in my comics explanations, that Namor was the first superhero who was ever able to fly. Superhero, questionable, but super character who was able to fly. It was some time after that, a short time after that, that DC said, well, why don't we make him able to fly also? Let's make Superman fly. So flying, so you couldn't have a Superman character who could fly in a reprint or anything to that effect. Nope, couldn't do that. But you could absolutely do that with jumping. Able to bend steel and just any kind of super strength for the most part. How strong was he? They never actually said he is able to bench press this many pounds or this many tons. They never said that. So you could literally make infinite strength Superman Prime level strength for him, and who's going to say no? But he can't fly. He has to jump. He could, dodge bullets and bullets bounce off him, run at any kind of speed that you want to run at, whatever. None of that stuff really matters. You can have that. But you can't call him Superman. on the front cover. Inside, you can call him Superman. Space, no space, whatever you want. You can do that, but on the front cover, you can't. Why not? Because that falls into the realm of trademark. Trademark, copyright, I know. It's complicated. This is why lawyers get paid the big money. This is why lawyers and judges and all those things, they're considered shysters for the most part. Shyster and Shyster Inc., right? Because, man, just messing up words, changing things, bankers, big deal, right? Because they change up words and just make it harder for us to understand. Well, it's hard enough to begin with, but it is what it is. So looking into the business law aspect of the letter of the law, you're able to recreate certain things. I want to give you a point. You can sell Superman objects, but you can't advertise them. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at this. You can go to your local Walmart or your local dollar store, your local discount mart. Any place that's got one of those discount bins of DVDs and things like that, and find all those original Superman cartoons, because they were made long enough ago that, whatever, man. And Superman's flying in there too, mind you. It's just, it is what it is. But the copyrights on those, have already expired. So, done deal. The thing is, you can't advertise that in a newspaper. If you do, and DC notices it, you will be sued, because now you're talking about the trademark. Trademark is something that's advertised, all right? Copyright, you don't advertise a copyright, you advertise a trademark. So there's the deal. The print for Superman, the original print or the print of today, can you copyright that? Can you trademark that? Yes and no. Anywhere in the world, a font, all right, and anywhere in the world, a typeset. See, there's a difference between a type and a font set. A font and a typeset. A font is a computer program, all right. That's all it is. It's telling your computer the shape of the letters in a consistent thing, which is the exact same thing as a typeset, except that's drawn. That's a calligraphy kind of thing. Every place in the world, a typeset, something that is hand-drawn, calligraphy style, symbol of, like, let's say the S is, small on the top, small on the bottom, but really fat in the middle, and this particular, okay, so if here's the S, imagine if you also made A, B, C, D, E, and all the other letters of the alphabet in that particular vein, okay? That is a typeset. If you're hand-drawing it, it's typeset. Everywhere in the world, that can be copywritten, except for one major place, and that's the United friggin' States of America. For some reason, we don't acknowledge that. Yes, I'm in Canada, but I am an American, so deal with it. But if it's a computer language, so therefore if it's a font, that's a different story. That, because that counts as intellectual property in that regard, but not if it's hand-drawn. So if it's a font, well, no, you absolutely cannot use that. That is that falls under trademark law. That is patented. You cannot copy that. So as long as you do it by hand, and you can prove that you did them by hand, you're perfectly fine. But once it becomes a font, now you've actually got legal problems. It's complicated, isn't it? That's why I thought this would be such a great, dumb podcast. But here's the deal. Lois Lane was in that first Action Comics #1 issue, all right? Jimmy Olsen was not. Perry was not. The Daily Planet was. So any of those things, yes, absolutely. You can reuse that. Why not? You can absolutely reuse that. They are trademarked, so you can't advertise the Daily Planet TV show or movie or comic book or whatever, but you could absolutely have the Daily Planet inside a comic. And mind you, I'm not your lawyer, so if DC said, because mind you, look, here's the thing. Understand something about lawsuits. If you cross the street, I can sue you. Will it be heard in court? I don't know. But I can absolutely put forth a lawsuit. And if I'm a rich corporation with dozens of lawyers and you're just a little guy who couldn't afford bail bond, then you're going to be scared and you're going to say, okay, I submit. I won't cross the street anymore because you know what I'm saying, whether you got a case or not, it's going to be a scary kind of thing. So absolutely, you know what I'm saying, and no, crossing the street, that's really just a hyperbole. in reality, something along the lines of, not signing your name in a certain way, obviously, but yeah, making your own font. If Microsoft decides to come after you and say, no, 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 we think that's too much like ours, so here's a cease and desist, you're going to stop. Because if you don't, you might win the case if you go to case, but if you take the case to the court, but understand that's going to cost a lot of money. And you've got to pay for your own lawyers, and most lawyers don't work pro bono, and most lawyers won't even say, oh yeah, sure, yeah, oh yeah, you can sue for my lawyer fees. But the thing is, you will be paying me my lawyer fees first. So if you win this case and you get reimbursed for your lawyer fees, that's a reimbursal. I'm already getting paid before we even start the first bit of paperwork on this. Just capiche? So yeah, you see my Italian comes out once in a while. You understand? Capiche? You understand? So bang, that's pretty much the deal there. So, mind you, if I say something, I am not your lawyer. This is not a counseling session. Just please understand that. I didn't charge you a consultation fee. So therefore, you cannot use what I'm saying as proof for anything, well, as the letter of the law. You can't use it as the letter of the law. So deal with it. In the meantime, and I'm not liable if you decide to screw up a lawsuit, get yourself, in trouble. Sorry, that's not coming back to me. But the point here is that the idea of in here, you could absolutely make a Superman character for all intents and purposes, and several characters are in the public domain, right? I did the Fletcher story with Phantoma. You can absolutely copy those comics. You can make the Pathfinder comics that are in publication right now at the time of this podcast. Issue number 4 is scheduled to come out. I reviewed issue number 1 and 2. I didn't review issue 3. I was too bogged down with way too many comic reviews that week, and something had to suffer. So Pathfinder issue 3 had to suffer. Sorry, but Red Sonja's in there, public domain. Doesn't belong to Edgar Rice Burroughs anymore. Edgar Rice Burroughs? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Okay, that one I forget. But in the meantime, we do have Phantoma, which was originally owned by Fletcher, and that they're reproducing. And what are you going to do? Okay, here's Edgar Rice Burroughs. I'm thinking Tarzan. If you make Tarzan, boom, anybody can make a Tarzan movie, comic book, reproduce anything that's already been out there, because why not? Why not? It's in public domain right now. The original Ghost Rider comics, I did a very exhaustive review, 10 episodes of Ghost Rider, which I'm probably going to have to redo one of these days, because that was one of my early set of videos, and I'm not proud of those at all right now, but neither here nor there. So we have these things. Now, I'm going to give you an example of something that's a little bit messed up here. Let's look at all of the clones of Superman. Now, if DC has multiple versions of Superman, right? They've got Kal-El, obviously. They've got Supergirl. They've got Superwoman. They've got Superman Red, Superman Blue. Well, they had them, and thank God they're gone. They've got Mon-El, all right? They've got the Supermen. They've got the Reign of the Superman. They've got all the different. They've got Red Sun Superman. You look at multiplicity right now in the comics currently, okay? That's in is that in Action Comics, or is that in Superman? I think that's in Action Comics. You have all these different Superman going on. Obviously, if it's DC and they own this, they can do whatever the heck they want to do. But Marvel has Superman clones also, ish, right? We can look at Hyperion. We can look at the Guardian. Gladiator. Excuse me, Gladiator. All right. Guardian is over in in DC. That's actually a Captain America ripoff, right? We've got, who else? We've got the Sentry, all right? We've got Blue Marvel, all right? We've got so many. I know I can go on. I just don't want to sit here and the entire issue, the entire episode. But there are a lot of them, and you know this. You know this. Heck, you could even argue that in some ways Thor is one, right? DC likes to say that the very first superhero is Superman. I'm afraid that's simply not the case. He's not the first superpowered person. He's really not the first anything. All right? He's the most inspirational, and people often refer to him as the first, but they also say that Juggernaut is unstoppable, and he's not. They say that Hulk is the strongest one there is, and he's not. They say that Doomsday can adapt to anything, and he can't. But we like to say things, all right? They're just not always true just because we say them. So he's not the first superhero. But to copy Superman, you'd figure that's a big deal. but Marvel is not being sued for any of these characters. And some of these have very, very similar stories, background stories and everything to Superman, and they've been around for a long time. Why aren't they being sued? But meanwhile, Shazam, Captain Marvel, he was in 13 or 14 years of litigation. 13 years of litigation, yes. He was created, and then a couple months later, the year changed to 1940. He was created in 1939, and then 1940, February, was the first release of the issue. That was the cover date, but he was actually released in 1939. So only a few years after Superman came out. And literally, what do you got there? He comes out, and he doesn't look like Superman. He's got a very different jawline. He's got a very different everything. His hair was dark as opposed to blonde. And they had 4-color palette back in the day. There wasn't much you could do with 4 colors. All right. He didn't come from another planet. His alter ego was not a man. It was a boy. It was a reporter, but this guy was on a radio reporter. Clark Kent was a newspaper reporter, right? Print and spoken word. That's different. That's different. The storyline seemed different enough to me, but DC was able to successfully sue Captain Marvel. Well, the trick is they were actually able to successfully sue a whole lot of people, a whole lot of different companies. Why? Because they were established. They were already established, and they were making money. And by that time, they had a lot more than just Superman. They already had Batman out. They already had Wonder Woman out. They had the Hawks, Hawkman and Hawkwoman. They had all these different characters out by this time. I mean, by the second appearance of Wonder Woman in Sensational Comics, at the same issue, they debuted Mr. Terrific. And maybe you're like, who's Mr. Terrific? He's this guy, he's a genius, and yeah, he's almost as smart as Batman and Lex Luthor, basically. After them, he's the third smartest person in the DC universe. Maybe. But, they had minor characters by this time. So they had lots of money makers in publication, in print. But all these other companies were very small. So, like I said, if some big company decides to sue you for something small, something that, you could clearly win in court, but you don't have the money to go to court, and you don't have the money for a lawyer. And let's face it, if you see 6 lawyers sitting across from you in the plaintiff's booth area, and you're there all by yourself, self-representing, and you see that look on the judge saying, are you sure you want to do this? Your average person is going to back down. I'm talking 99 point whatever is going to back down, because it's the smart thing to do. It's better to simply say, you know what? I'm going to follow the cease and desist, as opposed to having to pay for damages. All right? But they didn't sue Marvel because Marvel had money. By the time that they were able to, anything along those lines, I mean, Marvel had to really hide themselves as being competition for a long time. They were doing monster magazines, crime magazines, detective magazines, horror magazines, all sorts of things like that, and kind of under the same distribution as DC for a long time, right? But they couldn't actually be in the superhero business because DC was suing anything that moved. Was it fair? Not even close. And this is why I don't like to choose between who I like better, DC or Marvel. But if I had to make a choice, I'm going to have to say Marvel. I will oftentimes think of a way I can backtrack out of saying this. I'm usually going to say Marvel. And the reason why I'm going to say Marvel, sorry, my computer just acted stupid. No, I do not want sticky keys. The reason why I'm going to choose Marvel over DC is because although Marvel has, been in litigation, they have sued people before and things like that, they, to the best of my understanding and the best of relevance, they did not put anybody out of business for something that was fair. Okay? DC has put many companies pretty much out of business because of the direct actions that they took against them, because they said that we own superheroes. All right? Not even close to fair. Guys, Captain Marvel, you could try and argue that he's too much like Superman, but in reality, in what way exactly? When you're talking about copyright, he didn't have the same trademark. He didn't have any trademark issues. He was called Captain Marvel, and he was called Superman. They didn't have Captain Marvel had a lightning bolt on his chest. Didn't even look like the Flash's lightning bolt when the Flash finally came out. Didn't look like his. And his costume didn't look the same. Oh, he had a cape. He had a cape. Even the cape didn't look anything like his. He had a two-tier cape, you know, plus the little flower-looking things. It was a white cape, wasn't the same color, wasn't the same length, wasn't the same anything. I bet you could even argue the material. You know what I'm saying? He didn't bring that with him from his dad's planet. You know what I'm saying? So he didn't come from a different planet. Right? His origin story wasn't the same. His name wasn't the same. Oh, they both worked in media, but they were still two different forms of media. Heck, I used to be an electrical engineer. Does that mean that somebody who's a mechanical engineer can sue me? No, because that would be stupid. But the idea is that you can always find some way to do it, and National wasn't making the money that DC was. Now, to be fair, Shazam outsold Superman by a pretty good margin. The trick is, I actually mentioned the plausibility in that, is the idea that Fawcett Comics didn't have, they're the ones who owned Captain Marvel at the time. They didn't have any other real characters. They had a couple other characters, you know, whatever. Dashing Dan, I think, was one of them. It wasn't Dashing Dan, whatever. They had a couple of the characters. They didn't surmount to anything. They were literally like, sorry, they were throwaway characters. You know what I'm saying? Nobody cared about them. They only really cared about the one character. Now, if DC Comics only had Superman, DC wouldn't have been anything. But they had the Green Lantern, they had Batman, they had Wonder Woman, they had the Hawks, they had Martian Manhunter, they had all these other characters throughout this time. And they kept on getting more and more and more characters. And unfortunately, a lot of these characters were absorbed. The Blue Beetle didn't start off in DC Comics. Blue Beetle didn't belong to them, but the Blue Beetle is now a DC character. Gee, why is that? Let's not make this podcast too darn expansive, but oh wow, it's already 32 minutes. But when push comes to shove, yeah, they they really took a lot. They took a lot of characters that they just kind of scooped them up and absorbed them into their own after litigation, after lawsuits, after buying out other companies and whatnot. And that's what they did with Captain Marvel. After all these years, Captain Marvel was able to successfully, there were mistakes made in both regards. Mistakes made in favor of DC as well as mistakes made in favor of Fawcett. But when push comes to shove, they were never really going to be able to, especially, this was all before the Silver Age, mind you, and this is crucial. Okay? 1953, Fawcett realized that this was post-World War II. All comic book sales had went down by this point. Captain America had already had two comebacks, two failed comebacks. All right? Captain America had two failed comebacks at this point. And in 1953, like, okay, we're actually done with Captain America. And it wasn't until many years later that they finally said, let's give him another try. We got this Avengers comic out, all right? Let's see what we can do. You know, no. Just not at all. Didn't work. It didn't work in their favor at all. So DC had a whole bunch of heroes. Even many of their heroes went away, but their big three never went anywhere. Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. They stayed. And a few others. They still made appearances and whatnot. Justice League, you know, would eventually show up. But the idea is that they had many characters to fall on. Fawcett literally only had one. They had throwaway characters after that. And when the sales had it dipped by more than half, they finally said, you know what, the comic, this was their big mistake, was that they thought that comic books were about to end completely. So they said, you know what, here's the deal. We're going to pay you for, they settled out of court after winning two cases. You could say whatever you want to say about it. They came out winning the case. It was in the favor of Fawcett Comics. They came out and there was a third litigation against them. DC was still resuing them again. They were for a third time, and the costs were just too expensive. And they literally looked at it and they said, you know what, this isn't worth it. It's not worth it. Just like so many little people would say, finally Fawcett Comics, who didn't have the money, didn't have the revenue that DC had, they weren't as expansive as DC. They finally said, you know what, screw it. It's not worth it. It's just not. So it's okay. Here's the deal. We're going to pay you a lousy $400,000. Yes, even back then for Fawcett, that was a paltry amount. For was it Wilbur Faulkner? Thinking of William Faulkner. No, Wilbur Fawcett. He was the owner of Fawcett Comics. He said, you know, it's just not worth it. Here, you take this money, and we're going to take a cease and desist. We're going to take that original cease and desist that you said. We're settling completely out of court. Drop your lawsuit, and here's this money. And we, you know, it's agreed on, right? We're agreed on this amount, and we promise we will never do this comic book again. That went to the judge. The judge said, you guys are both okay with this? You settled this out of court. You're both okay with this? You don't want to argue this? No, we're both good. Okay, done. Gavel comes down. The court case is now done. It's heard. It is now done, right? It's adjourned. Well, 3 years later, the Silver Age of Comics Showcase issue number 4 came out in 1956. Yeah, 3 years later, right? The Flash, Barry Allen debuted, the second Flash after Jay Garrick. He showed up, and then there was just this resurgence. Eventually, Marvel, excuse me, actually came into, oh God, talking, it hurts. You know, if I were a comedian on stage, you'd be applauding when I took the drink. You never watch comedy shows? So the point is that, yeah, Fawcett finally said, you know, oh, wow, we want to get back into the comics industry. So they did. They rebirthed several of the characters, right? And they started bringing in more. They started trying to make up more, and they started, you know, trying to make a comeback. But they didn't have their big money maker. They didn't have it anymore. So they said, okay, we're done. And they literally had to just, they didn't have any, nobody even wanted to buy their properties for the most part. They literally just fizzled out. For all intents and purposes, all right, with minor exceptions, they pretty much just completely fizzled out. And DC, oh God, this is ruthless. They said, since we've technically proven, all right, in court we couldn't prove a damn thing, but since they decided to, you know, bail out, and they promised that they will never make this character again, technically, we own this character, unless someone would like to object. Fawcett Comics couldn't afford to object. Couldn't. They had to dissolve. Who else was going to contest it? Well, Marvel did, but only for the name. Once Captain Marvel was gone, once Stan Lee had really argued for Marvel, the owners of Marvel, to say, hey, listen, man, we want to change the name of, you know, Atlas Comics to Marvel. We didn't like Timely. We don't want Atlas. Let's make it Marvel Comics, okay? So they said, okay, but there's a Captain Marvel over here, so that kind of looks bad for us. But once they went down, Marvel went and sued for the name, for the trademark, right, of Captain Marvel. So now DC could use the term Marvel, Captain Marvel, if they wanted to, inside the comic, but not on the cover. In fact, they got a cease and desist from Marvel because they tried to, DC went and put out the title Shazam, the former Captain Marvel, something to that effect. That's not verbatim, excuse me, but they did put out something to that effect, the original Captain Marvel, or the former Captain Marvel, Shazam. And Marvel put out a cease and desist. And Marvel had many characters by that point. They had TV deals, cartoon deals, all right? They already had their first horrible serial failure, movie serial that was going out, and everything with Captain America that wasn't really Captain America. Steve Grant, I think was his name. Not Steve Rogers, something Grant. Anyway, so they had money, and they knew, yeah, we can go against Marvel, and we might win, but it's not worth it. Now, DC was actually in that case, and literally being a fan, not necessarily way back when, but a fan as I'm growing up and I'm understanding this stuff, I'm literally like, yeah, you know what? As much as I love the characters and the properties of DC, I literally said, screw you, DC. You got exactly what you deserve. How does that feel? Now, if only Fawcett had the money, because if Fawcett did have the money to keep going, we would have a big three. I believe that we would have a big three, right? It'd be like having a third party in the elections in America, right? Republicans, Democrats, and blah, 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 you know? Let's call them progressives, you know? Whoever, we would have a third party. Maybe a Jesse Ventura party. We'd actually call it the Jesse Ventura party maybe, right? Who knows? But the idea is that we would have something different. Well, in comics, we would probably have a third big one because Captain Marvel, Shazam, was big enough that they could have gotten their act together. They could have come back with that huge explosion in the Silver Age where we realized that, yeah, we really do still want, comic book characters and superheroes. DC could have been sued way back in the day. I'm just going to accept that this is going to be a really long podcast, whatever. You like it or you click off. Sorry, guys, but please stay with me. I think that you'll like the knowledge, #knowledge, that you're going to get from this. DC could have been sued, absolutely. Because when you look at what a copyright law is, you have to look at everything, but not just what the character looks like, but the origin story also. DC likes to claim that Superman is the first superhero. No, he's not. No, he's absolutely not. Let's first off, let's start with Batman. Batman. Okay, Bob Kane. Bob Kane used to get all this credit. He still does get a lot of credit. Even if you look in the comic books right now, Detective Comics, Batman, anything that has Batman in it, the Trinity comic, again, like I said, it will always say Batman created by Bob Kane with Bill Finger. Bill Finger actually had more to do with the creation of Batman as we know him, and even way back in the original, back in the day. All right, he actually had more to do with the creation of Batman. I've actually got the old Superman here. I've got the old Batman there. I didn't think I was going to talk about Batman, and I'd have to finagle him out. So I'm just not even going to bother with that. Just I've got him. Other videos you can see him. So Batman actually had a lot to do with Joe Finger, but Joe Finger was an employee of DC, and Bob Kane technically sold the character, so they kind of went back to him, and it's really just a legal mumbo-jumbo thing. If DC doesn't have to say that it was owned or that it was created by so-and-so, they wouldn't. They absolutely wouldn't. But it's actually a respect thing that they say with Bill Finger. So again, #knowledge if we're going to do silly hashtags. So where did that character come from? Originally in a sense came from Superman, because the Superman, DC Comics said, hey man, Superman is a big hit. Can we make another Superman type character? Because they can do that. So Bob Kane came along and said, oh yeah, absolutely. Here's Batman. Check him out. Look, he's got a cape just like, he does. Cool, right? And yeah, what's his powers? No powers. He's just a guy with a secret identity, right? That can't be a superhero without a secret identity back then. All right. So, bang, you've got that. And, he's got a cape and he goes around, he's got a gun, and that didn't last for too long. And, boom, that's what you got. But we had another character like that, and his name was the Phantom, and that was by Will Eisner. And Will Eisner is oftentimes considered the greatest original comic book creator out there. Oops. So Batman was kind of stolen. Oh, but Batman doesn't have superpowers, and technically, the Shadow has a superpower. Okay. Well, there's also this guy, Lee Falk, and he made the Phantom. All right, that purple guy with the mask and the two guns. Batman was going around with a gun. Crap. Right, and he had a secret identity, the little mask with the costume. Yeah, it kind of looked like that. Oops. Okay, but he's not in a jungle. He's in a city. He goes to the city and he does all these things. Cool, man. You ever hear Johnston McCulley? He made this guy called Zorro. Oops. And even the homage that later on, no, Bob Kane would never, ever. His ego was so out there. He would never say that he got inspiration from anyone or anything. But it's true. And even later on, people pay homage to the original Batman, Zorro, and say that the movie that Bruce just had to see, which the back exit led out to Crime Alley, would actually be the Mark of Zorro, the Mask of Zorro, Mark of Zorro. Anyways, one of the Zorro movies, all right? And so, yeah, we all know that's where it really came from. So Bob Kane, no. DC, no. Why didn't they sue? Because it's more of the idea of, why bother? Why bother? Let's get out some more, characters. Let's get out some more, people like that. Guys, the guy who made the polio vaccine, right? He didn't copyright it. The guy who made, who invented, oh God, why am I forgetting this? Penicillin. There we go. Left it out there because he wanted people to not be sick. You know what I'm saying? But then when you're talking about the guy who bought the AIDS, and I never want this guy to be remembered for anything good ever. The guy who bought the AIDS treatment, he brought that price up by 1,000%, literally, right? $7,000, I think it was, for like one pill. I don't even think it was for a prescription. It's for one pill, right? Like just so ethics in business is important when you're going for a business degree. But it is what it is. These other guys, they didn't want to sue. More than that, we're going to kind of go back to Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter of Mars. You ever hear of that guy? They made a really crappy movie recently. There was a movie before that. It was a comic strip. It was stories and all sorts of things like that. You're going to tell me that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster didn't steal the idea of Batman or sample, let's use rap mechanics now, sample the idea of Superman from John Carpenter of Mars? Because he absolutely did. I'm going to give you an idea here. Okay, here's an example. The idea that, because a lot of people say, there's this movie Gladiator. Was it a movie? I didn't think it was a movie. It was a comic strip. Anyway, it was a story. Excuse me. It was a short story, Gladiator. All right, and I don't remember the name of the guy who did it, but all right, and Jerry Siegel specifically said, no, I didn't get the idea, the inspiration from that. Maybe, but heck, if I rob a bank, I'm not going to tell the police, yeah, I did it. Did you rob the bank? No. What am I? I'm an honest crook. I stole all the money. Did you steal it? Yeah, I cannot tell a lie. Screw that. All right? Likewise, he's going to deny it. But he could not deny John Carter because that would that would be stupid. That would actually be flat out stupid to deny something like that. John Carter, here's this guy. He's an earthling who goes to Mars, so he's an alien on that planet. And the gravity is so much lower on Mars that now John Carter is stronger than he normally would be. He's faster than he normally would be, and he can leap over tall buildings and do all sorts of things like that because of the gravity and whatnot. So, hey, that sounds like the original Superman. That one. So yeah, why didn't Edgar Rice Burroughs or his estate sue? Because why? But unfortunately, DC, and let's be realistic, okay? If you're going to sit here and argue this, that, or the other thing, DC also kind of completely screwed over. I'm talking about like the Manhattan Purchase, the purchase of Manhattan from the Native Americans, right? I learned back in 5th grade that it was purchased for $7, the equivalent of $7. Okay, way back when. And Native Americans didn't have that kind of a... Today, right now, if you go to Ghana, right, it's usually not one person who buys something. If it is, it's usually a foreigner who comes in and he's going to purchase something and I'm going to own this whole business right here. But in Ghana, all right, just as an example, there are many examples like this, but specifically, a group of people will go in to make a business and there won't be any copyright laws or anything like that. And so mind you, the way that trademark and copyright laws work is you could copyright something and say, oh, I own it. I got the copyright on it before anybody else does. But if somebody else can prove that it existed before that or that they did it before that, case in point, if I write a short story on the internet about the awesome man, let's say awesome man. Okay, I don't know if there's an awesome man out there. If there is, I didn't know. But let's say awesomeness man, okay, whatever. Then you come along and you read that story and I don't care if it's 10 years later, you say, oh, I copywrote it. It could be a year later. It could be a minute later. I copywrote this. All right, so awesomeness man is mine. Yes, until I go into court and I argue and I say, listen, you can look on the internet and that stuff is time dated, it's time stamped. Who did it first? Let's see, the copyright law was done on here. You can't prove that you made this before you made your copyright law. Meanwhile, Professor Bill over here shows that he time-stamped this an entire minute before you got your copyright law thing. So, yeah, sorry, this has to go to Professor Bill because a copyright law means nothing. A copyright law is literally, this is when I did something. If somebody can prove, even without a copyright, that they did so-and-so first, they win. and you literally wasted your money. That's the way that the law works, and that's actually a good thing. That's actually a really good thing, so that somebody can't come along and steal your idea, right? As long as you can prove that you did it first, it doesn't matter who copyrights it, who patents it, who whatever. When you patent something, you copyright something, it's in the law that this is when you did it, and if someone can prove, and that you're saying that you have no knowledge that somebody did something beforehand, but if the proof comes up later that even if you did, if you can't prove that you didn't know something, but you know, if it can't be proven, whatever, it's the idea that he or she can prove that, you know, this was done first before your copyright. If you can't prove that you did it even before your copyright, you're done. You're done, son. So that's the deal. Edgar Rice Burroughs did John Carter of Mars a couple of years before Superman ever came out, and he just didn't sue. So that's the way that works. But when they bought, I forget what the exact amount was. The price varies sometimes. Some people say $1,000. What the equivalent of that would be today? Maybe that is the equivalent. But they bought, you know, those copyrights from Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster for a very paltry amount by today's standards, by how expensive, you know, how much money they made off of that. So they really kind of screwed the family over, screwed the individuals over, big time, screwed them over. I mean, these guys were working odd jobs and bankrupt and all sorts of things until around the Richard Donner movie came out, right? So yeah, DC really screwed over these creators. So here's the deal. Who do you love more, Superman or DC Comics? You know what I'm saying? Like, who do you love more, right or wrong? I mean, it's just the way it is. DC has always kind of done some very, very sincerely shady things. I mean, ethically, just, you can always look back in hindsight, hey, has Marvel done some bad things? Because I hate saying the term fanboy, but realistically, sometimes people are gonna, you know, like if you're a DC fanboy, here's what you're gonna say. If you're saying this, you are a DC fanboy, and that's kind of prejudice. That is absolutely a prejudice, because now you don't care about right or wrong. You care about, but DC, I love DC. Look, if Marvel has done some shady things also, all right? Not even shady things. I wouldn't even say shady things, all right? Shady's actually a step too far. DC's done shady things. If you love Jack Kirby, you're obviously going to say that, oh, Jack Kirby did all this stuff and Marvel didn't compensate him properly. Well, unfortunately, by the ways of the law, they compensated him just fine, and they went above and beyond. All right, they gave him back as much of the work as they did, half of his work. He says not even half. He's also known for not having a very great memory. And I love Jack Kirby. Go back and see my 4-part Jack Kirby biography. I love Jack Kirby. They did what they could. You know what I'm saying? They could have done more, but they technically did do more than DC ever did for their creators and anybody else ever did. But there's also the idea that they can't just say, okay, yes, you own. Jack Kirby wanted to own Captain America and the Silver Surfer, and he actually wanted to own Spider-Man, even though technically he had little next to nothing to do with Spider-Man, but in his memory, it was him. Not Stan Lee, not Steve Ditko. It was all him, solely him. And he wanted the rights to Spider-Man, so yeah, his memory, sorry, we don't go by his memory. His wife was awesome, and that's one of the many reasons why she was awesome. But the point is that, yeah, his memory was kind of faulty, but imagine if he took all these characters and he just simply said, okay, I own these characters. So now you've got to pay me this exorbitant amount because DC, who earns more money than Marvel does, is offering me to come over and work for them. And if I go and work for them, I'm taking all my characters with me. That would be horrible. That would be disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. So we can look at it that way too. The laws are meant, they're in place and they are what they are. And that's really all that they are. So yeah, Marvel has actually done more for their artists. The reason why artists and the reason why creators, and the creator is determined by the artist and at the very least the penciler. All right, the penciler does everything before the colorist, and even before the inker does anything. So they say the penciler and the writer are the two people who are considered the creators of a character, and they will get paid royalties based on this, that, and the other thing. However they decide to do it, that's how they decide to do it. I'm not even going to look into the intricacies of that because I just don't care. But they will get paid according to that. So if the Defenders get made into a movie, you know, Len Wein, who had a lot to do with Iron Fist and had pretty much everything to do with Power Man, Luke Cage, right? And all these different people who worked on Daredevil, and there's a lot of people who worked on Daredevil, but all the Jessica Jones. We're talking about Brian Michael Bendis now. These characters will now, or these people will now get something based on that. So, and consideration and credits, and none of that ever had to happen before. Again, if it wasn't, I just did Artie Simek, an Artie Simek biography 2 weeks ago, and he was an inker, one of the main inkers, actually the main inker, but one of the two main inkers for Marvel Comics, and it was because Stan Lee said, listen, the inkers deserve credit on these stories also, just like, he was a letterer, the letterers and the inkers, for crying out loud, the inkers and, like Artie Simek, the letterers, they both deserve credits also, not just the artists and the writers. Okay, so the laws have constantly updated, and DC then followed suit with that because otherwise they're the bad guys. So I've always seen DC as being a lot more shady and underhanded, and basically I've seen them as being more unethical than Marvel has been, and they're definitely shady. All right, today, not so much. Today, there's the internet, there's all sorts of different things, there's public opinion, there's social media. You do something bad in business now, people know, and people can boycott you. Right? Just look at the Dakota Access Pipeline and things like that. If that didn't get the media attention that it got on social media, forget about it. They'd have drilled through there. They'd have killed the Native Americans who were there, whoever, like Shailene Woodley, the Divergent lead actress. She brought that to attention. So social media and different things like that, I love them. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's bad because it's too reactionary. Deal with it. Okay, there's too much good that comes out of it. You look at the changes in dictatorship government over in the Middle East, often called the Arab Spring. That happened because of the availability of social media. So, yeah, dictators thrown out in as much of a nonviolent way as possible because attention was brought to it through non-corporate media. Yeah, you're welcome. So it's one of the things that keeps people honest. But, yeah, DC has done some very shady things in the past that just beyond unethical. They're trying to make up for it now. We can't blame the old regime for the new regime, and they're working with it now. And obviously, the Siegel family could just say, "Up yours, DC. We're gonna sell the rights that we have, which are most of the rights for Superman, over to Marvel or to Dark Horse, to whomever we want, or do our own thing." But they don't. They continue to work with DC, not only because it's more profitable and much easier for them, but because DC has really done a very big 180, and that is so crucial. Guys, this has clearly gone on long enough. If you stayed with me the whole time, one, you learned a lot. Two, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, genuinely. Guys, if you have suggestions for Comic Book University, requests, for crying out loud, I got a request to do the Flamingo, a Batman character. That's not happening anytime soon, okay? But I did make a promise, and I'm going to do it, all right? But just, oh, God. Dylan, sometimes I don't like you. But no, you're one of my originals, so I love you, man. Anyway, all of you guys who comment a lot of times, I appreciate it. Guys, Professor Bill, Comic Book University, and class dismissed.